Woo boy! I know this topic will ruffle some feathers one way or another, but just calm the keyboards down just for a second. Actually, go ahead and pause the video, comment down below what your initial opinion on the topic is, then, after watching the whole video, edit the comment down below and let's see if anything changed. On with the video. Alright guys, I'm going to put up some B-roll footage while I discuss if the Cycle Frontier could implement a revive mechanic, and if so, what that might look like if it would be done in a manner that both fits the game thematically, while also retaining the feel of the current gameplay. Now, I'm not a coder or a dev, so for the sake of this discussion, we'll operate with the assumption that we can make a revive mechanic and look for ways it could be implemented. After we've discussed that a bit, we'll go over whether or not Cycle should implement a revive mechanic and what that could do for the game, both good and bad. Well, before flying off the handle, let's define some terms, because we're all gamers here and we've all likely played games that have some kind of knockdown, pickup, or revive mechanic, so let's discuss some basics first. Obviously, you need to consider situations where solos and duos are in the same lobby, and what happens to gear that's dropped the moment someone gets foamed. Since the Cycle currently has no knockdown feature, this would either need to be implemented or have the foamed body function as a point of interaction. Now, common sense dictates that creating a knockdown function would be a lot more work than making the foamed body an interactable object. Of course, you could consider some of the reusable assets left over from the old game, but that's too many unknowns for my speculation. For that reason, I'm going to operate under the assumption that the mechanics get involved after someone gets foamed as per usual. So from where I see it, there are two obvious routes you could take: reviving the foamed body where it is, or having some kind of beacon system to allow a currently dead player that's still part of your party an opportunity to redrop. To remain thematic with the game, either scenario should require an item in your inventory in order to perform this function. This should be relatively heavy and not cheap. This will continue the theme of risk versus reward with what you bring down to the planet. With these two possible options, let's first explore the simpler solution in theory, the redrop feature. So the item could be some kind of landing beacon that needs to be placed on specific points on the map. For ease of coding, I imagine these could already be existing spawn locations. The player who died could be given an option to redeploy and hit that button to queue up, or it could be done automatically since they would still be remaining in the same party. You could hold the player in limbo or let them go into the station depending on what makes more sense coding wise. It really doesn't matter. For simplicity's sake, you could hold them in limbo with the option to opt out of being revived. The player that is still on the planet can make their way to a beacon point, activate the beacon, and start the station side player into the loading sequence. Regardless of loading times, there should be a window of time in which calling said beacon could be seen and heard from a decent distance, maybe a beam of light pointing up to the sky or a flare with a corresponding sound. After that time frame, the player lands as per normal but isn't allowed to bring any gear. Free loadouts shouldn't be allowed to prevent exploiting it for free gear generation. Okay, so with that option laid out, from what I see, it's a pretty straightforward way of implementing a revive mechanic, but it leaves a lot to be desired. Mainly, that all a teammate would have to do in order to mitigate the death would be to scoop up their fellow player's gear and then escape. Later, they could find a quiet part of the map and get the teammate back in. Sure, you would need space for all the other players' gear as well as the beacon, but to me, that's not really enough of a risk to justify the reward that you're getting. The other option would be to defoam the body where it is. Now, a simple channel to revive like you've seen in other games wouldn't really be a good match for the Cycle. Again, you should need an item in your inventory in order to perform this function, and in this case, you could possibly make a medkit that serves dual functions. Personally, I think a completely separate item would be better, as bringing it in your inventory doesn't grant you any benefit other than possibly being able to revive somebody. This also gives a slight advantage to a solo, as that's one item they don't need to bring. Again, it should be a lengthy process, loud, and have some kind of visual to make it easy to spot. Maybe not light in the sky easy, but noticeable if it's just around the corner from cover, maybe sparks and foam flying or something. Now, in order to not make a dead body just a waiting game, there should be a time constraint on how long you can wait before the rest can start. And there should be no indication how much time you have left. This adds urgency, and it should be channeled to add risk. If you want to go even further, you could have the item be consumed or put the item on a cooldown the moment you start the channel. So even just interrupting the res process could be an accomplishment. With this in mind, team fights could have additional factors added to them after players begin to get foamed. These bodies could become objectives to fiercely fight over while providing counterplay opportunities. For example, enemy gear could be picked up and moved to prevent any res player from having gear readily available to them. It would also incentivize more aggressive fights. A team that got the pick will want to secure the body site, while the team that lost the player would want to do the same. This will also make it so that if a solo versus a duo or a duo versus a trio fight happens, the starting smaller team can still retain the advantage if they get the first pick. The larger starting team can't just mitigate the early loss unless they act quickly, which will create opportunities for the smaller team to exploit, either by continuing the fight or escaping during that time. For example, if a solo player picks off a player from a duo, if the remaining duo player doesn't get that process started quickly, that death will be permanent. The solo at this point can use the foamed body as bait, knowing the remaining player will have to either play aggressively or risk being picked while rezzing. If it isn't played well, the remaining duo player could kill the solo player but fail to res his teammate, or the solo could escape while the duo still manages to not res their teammate because they're not aware that the solo has already left the area. So out of the two options that I laid out, redropping the player or rezzing on site, I think rezzing on site would be the best fit for the cycle, as it still retains a lot of the risk/reward balance the game rides on. Even if you're carrying the required item, rezzing isn't guaranteed, and it creates new team fight dynamics to challenge players in order to utilize the rewards. So in my estimation, the cycle could add rezzing in a way that fits the game, but let's discuss whether it should. The downside is obvious. It decreases the punishment that death proposes. Right now, when you die, and you feel it the moment that Left Behind scream shows. That sigh that follows is kind of part of the game. It stings and it's supposed to. It's not COD where you instantly just come back with no second thought. However, I don't think having a revive changes that. I'm assuming everyone here has played a game where you've been knocked or killed and have been at the mercy of the enemy team, silently or not so silently, cheering on your teammates. And when they fail, all of your hopes were crushed, and you still had that same sting. It was just delayed. If you make being rezzed very difficult, death still stings because the odds are against your teammate, but that little bit of hope does a lot. It keeps you in the game mentally, which shouldn't be underrated. How many times have you been picked off and then best case scenario, your teammates scoop up your gear and move towards evac just to get you back in? Sure, you're glad your teammates won the fight, but it's bittersweet because it doesn't really change your outcome. That drop just becomes a waste of time for both you and your teammates. So let's peel that back a bit and imagine newer players, or when you're trying to introduce friends into this game and that happens. The average video game player plays for an average of 1 hour a day. Imagine getting on, having that happen, and then having that happen one more time. You're basically spending the entire time you have to play in the lobby. Now, having a res in that game won't remove that possibility. I understand that. But the possibility of a res keeps you mentally engaged, and sometimes you will get rezzed. And those moments can be really cool even for seasoned players. Because the opposite scenario can also happen. You're listening to the fight comms and realize your team won and you're back in the game. The echoed, "Let's go!" rings through the comms. Their teammates get to save you and the drop, and so they're also on cloud 9. It's a great morale booster that gives you that high that can sustain you even through a bad drop or two. It's made all the better because it wasn't guaranteed and it was hard fought. The coordination challenges and opportunities for all players, but especially for higher level fights, will make the fights that much more intense, with moments of triumph when rezzes are able to be completed. If rezzing was like other games, a simple matter of walking over to the body, channeling for 3 seconds, and basically negating the death that just happened, then yes, I would be in full agreement. Rezzing does not belong in the cycle. However, if done correctly, I think it could add a lot more than it would take away. Well, that's it. Let me know if I changed your mind, or if you were already open to the idea to begin with. If you disagree or agree, have another idea, or want to add to the conversation, let me know down in the comments. If you're looking for more Cycle PvP content or guides, check out these videos here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, good hunting.